The Second Amendment has ignited a firestorm of debate like no other in the Bill of Rights. In this video, we'll unpack some of its history and controversy. But let's start here. The grammar on the amendment is a train wreck. I mean, by dedicating one of the initial 10 amendments to guns, clearly the Founding Fathers thought this was an important fundamental right. But the sentence is just not well written. A well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms, shall not be infringed. That's at least 1 comma too many, and it goes in reverse order of importance. As an article in The Economist concluded, it is hard to believe the framers would be happy with the result of their work. America remains bitterly divided over guns thanks to a bizarrely worded amendment that has not stood the test of time. Yeah, if the goal was to write a simple, clear sentence that would be understood for hundreds, if not thousands of years, I'm giving James Madison like a D-. But it does raise the question, how did everything that happened in America's early days, from the Intolerable Acts, to the Revolutionary War, to the Articles of Confederation, to the Federalist Papers, build up to that exact sentence? We'll cover all that and more through the following 8 facts about the Second Amendment. Fact number 1, the roots of the Second Amendment can be traced to the English Bill of Rights of 1689. The English Bill of Rights holds an elevated stature in legal history, perhaps only behind the Magna Carta. To this day, it's a crucial statute in English constitutional law. This document establishes basic civil rights and clarifies the line of succession for the crown. It also lays out a constitutional requirement for the crown to seek the consent of the people, as represented in Parliament. It's largely influenced by the ideas of John Locke, as of course were the American Founding Fathers, so it's no surprise that the Second Amendment would have its roots in the English Bill of Rights, which declared that Protestant citizens may have arms for their defense suitable to their conditions and as allowed by law. That provision was likely the result of the English Crown's attempts to use militias to control and disarm dissidents prior to the Glorious Revolution that removed King James II in favor of William and Mary. In her book, To Keep and Bear Arms, The Origins of an Anglo-American Right, historian Joyce Lee Malcolm argued that the right of the English population to privately hold arms was born in 1689. She asserted that Article 7 of the English Bill of Rights entrenched an individual's private right, as opposed to the right of a collective militia, as part of British constitutional law. This video is brought to you by Students for Liberty, an international non-profit organization focused on building a global network of elite young leaders passionate about liberty. Students for Liberty's coordinator program, designed for university students and recent graduates, is engineered to help you unleash your potential by providing you with the tools, training, and resources that you need to build a freer future. To apply or to learn more, see the link in the video description or visit studentsforliberty.org. Fact 2, the Second Amendment also has its roots in state constitutions. The Bill of Rights, of course, was ratified in 1791, but check out the Pennsylvania Declaration of Rights from 15 years earlier. That the people have a right to bear arms for the defense of themselves and the state. Vermont's Constitution, enacted in 1777, said the people have a right to bear arms for the defense of themselves and the state. Finally, here's the Massachusetts Declaration of Rights of 1780. The people have a right to keep and to bear arms for the common defense. Notice what those wordings have in common that's different from the final version of the Second Amendment? In all of those state constitutions, the language about the right to keep and bear arms comes first. These state constitutions reflect the reality that in founding era America, citizen militias existed to provide defense against the possibility of an invasion from, well, the British, yes, but also from aggression on the part of the federal government. Standing armies of professional soldiers, like what we have nowadays in the Navy, Army, Air Force, and so on, were viewed with deep skepticism, and in fact viewed as unnecessary, provided the citizenry could arm itself. Indeed, in Federalist 46, James Madison argued that state governments with militias of the people on their side would suffice to counterbalance a federally controlled regular army, even one with the full resources of the country. And it makes sense to prefer a decentralized power structure. Think about it. Nowadays, the target for an invading foreign army or a rogue general would be obvious: the government buildings in Washington, D.C. But if power and authority were thoroughly decentralized, armed militias scattered throughout the country from state capitals to cities to small towns without even a central registry or official list of who's a member, where and whom would an invading army attack? New York City? Ashtabula, Ohio? Last Chance, Iowa? That's why classical liberals have long pushed for decentralization as a measure of enhanced security. Even if you eliminate one branch of a decentralized network of militias, it would be like chopping off the leg of a starfish. A new leg would regenerate, and so a foreign invader would forever be playing whack-a-mole. Fact number 3, the Second Amendment went through several drafts. We covered the various state constitutions: Pennsylvania in 1776, Vermont in 1777, and Massachusetts in 1780. But as it turns out, Madison himself produced an initial draft of the Second Amendment in 1789. It's in the Annals of Congress and reads like this. Notice, again, the right to keep and bear arms comes first. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, a well-armed and well-regulated militia being the best security of a free country. But no person religiously scrupulous of bearing arms shall be compelled to render military service in person. To me, that initial draft is actually a lot better. It begins with the operative clause, which is the clearest, most important statement. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. But Madison would revise the amendment, reordering the first two clauses and ultimately inviting the possibility for different interpretations. His next draft would be resolved by the House of Representatives on August 24, 1789, and sent to the Senate. It said, "A well-regulated militia composed of the body of the people, being the best security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. But no one religiously scrupulous of bearing arms shall be compelled to render military service in person." The amendment took its final shape in the Senate, where the religious objector clause was removed and several other phrases were modified. For instance, the phrase referencing the militia as composed of the body of the people was taken out, and the description of the militia as the best security of a free state was modified to necessary to the security of a free state. Other changes were proposed and rejected, including limitations on a standing army in times of peace and the phrase "for the common defense" next to the words "bear arms." The final language of the Second Amendment was agreed to and transmitted to the states in late September of 1789. Fact 4. The Second Amendment has a prefatory or preface clause and an operative clause. So let's take a closer look at that final language. A well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. It's the only amendment in the Bill of Rights that has a preface before the actual substance of the amendment. The prefatory clause is a big part of the modern controversy, confusion, and legal interpretation. Look no further than District of Columbia v. Heller, the 2008 case in which the Supreme Court recognized that the Second Amendment protects an individual right to arms. That essentially the government can't enforce laws that prevent Americans from possessing commonly used weapons in their home for self-defense. But it was the prefatory clause that gave the dissenting Supreme Court justices their ammunition. They argued that the Second Amendment never guaranteed an individual right at all. Their argument is based on the reference to a well-regulated militia, which they define as a military force organized and supervised by the government. Being part of a well-regulated militia, the prefatory clause, can conceivably be interpreted by proponents of gun control as the only reason that the right to keep and bear arms exists, instead of just one of the reasons. But that argument falters in light of the very purpose for bills of rights throughout the world, from the English Bill of Rights to France's Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen, to the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Their main goal is to preserve and guarantee individual rights. As George Mason University law professor Nelson Lund put it, no one thinks that when the First Amendment speaks about the right of the people to petition the government, that it means only to protect the rights of lobbyists for state governments. It means individuals. What the Second Amendment is saying is you can't disarm the people under the pretext of regulating the militia. Moreover, the majority opinion in the Heller case written by Justice Antonin Scalia argues compellingly that it would make no sense to read the prefatory clause in the way the dissenting judges interpreted it, because that reading would render the operative clause moot, not to mention redundant. As Reason magazine said, when the words "the right of the people" are used elsewhere in the Bill of Rights, in the First and Fourth Amendments, for example, it plainly means a right that belongs to every individual, as opposed to a collective with special properties, such as a militia. Fact 5. History has not looked kindly upon previous attempts to regulate guns. In 1865, on the heels of the Civil War, many southern states passed a series of laws known as the Black Codes, or the Black Laws. These laws restricted the rights of African Americans to own property, conduct business, buy and lease land, and move freely through public spaces. A main feature of the Black Codes was the outlawing of vagrancy, which allowed local authorities to arrest people, you can guess which race, for minor infractions and commit them to involuntary labor. But baked right into the Black Codes, of course, was a restriction on African Americans' right to own and possess firearms. With the passage of the Black Codes, it became a crime for a black person to have a gun. The Harvard Law Review wrote, "For a significant portion of American history, gun laws bore the ugly taint of racism." The Atlanta Voice, a weekly African American community newspaper, opined, "Gun control historically has meant prohibiting blacks from owning one." Should we trust the same governing bodies and processes that passed those laws under the guise of protecting public safety to pass fair and moral laws nowadays? I sure don't. Especially since, as NBC News reported, the sales of guns to black Americans rose 58% in 2020, and that trend appears to be continuing as we move deeper into the 2020s. Rule of thumb: laws and regulations generally have less of an effect on the wealthy and the privileged, who can afford whatever legal curveballs are thrown their way, compared to the effect on the less fortunate, poor folks, minorities, immigrants, who can't. Keep that in mind the next time someone talks to you about common sense gun control. Fact 6. The two major political parties used to be flipped on the interpretation and implementation of the Second Amendment. Oh, how quickly we forget. It wasn't that long ago that Democrats were pro-gun rights while their Republican counterparts were less gun-ho. The seminal moment took place on May 2nd, 1967, when 24 armed members of the Black Panther Party stormed the California state capitol in Sacramento. As Mark Twain once said, history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. The Black Panthers were protesting the Mulford Bill. When Governor Ronald Reagan, a Republican, signed the bill into law a few months later, it prohibited the carrying of a loaded firearm on one's person or in a vehicle while in any public place or on any public street in a prohibited area of unincorporated territory except for specified law enforcement officers, military personnel, bank guards and messengers, sportsmen, private investigators, and patrol operators, and persons authorized to carry concealable weapons. When the protesters arrived at the Capitol, Reagan was hosting a group of 8th graders on the Capitol lawn. He was quickly hustled inside. The protesters were ushered away by state police who confiscated the weapons, despite the Panthers' argument that they could legally carry the weapons as long as they were not concealed. The Mulford Bill, still part of the California Penal Code, was supported by the National Rifle Association. Upon signing it, Reagan said, "There's no reason why on the street today a citizen should be carrying a loaded weapon." History doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. And when it comes to gun rights and the Second Amendment, history totally rhymes, but with the parties flipped. Once upon a time, when it suited their whims, Democrats were pro-gun. Once upon a time, when it suited their whims, Republicans were anti-gun. But know who's never flipped? Classical liberals and the principled pro-liberty movement in general. We haven't wavered or changed our messaging on this issue. We've always defended the individual's right to own guns, and we always will. And by the way, if you feel inspired by the ideas in this video and want to take action, visit studentsforliberty.org. Fact 7. There was another attack on the Second Amendment in 1994. Within the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act signed by Bill Clinton in 1994 was a subsection called the Public Safety and Recreational Firearms Use Protection Act. This is what came to be known as the assault weapons ban because it outlawed the ability to manufacture, transfer, or possess a semi-automatic assault weapon. 19 military-style or copycat assault weapons, including AR-15s, could no longer be manufactured or sold. It also banned certain high-capacity ammunition magazines of more than 10 rounds. But it came with a big unless. Unless, it continued, that weapon was lawfully possessed under federal law on the date of the enactment of this subsection. That date, September 13th, 1994. That little caveat represents what's known as grandfathering, and it's another way lawmakers protect the wealthy, the connected, and the privileged over and above the disadvantaged. Guns are expensive, of course, so this provision of the bill is like saying you must be this tall to get on this ride, except it was you must be this rich by this date if you want to own a semi-automatic assault weapon. It's a method of systematically prioritizing the interests of the wealthy over the interests of everyone else. Because remember, when a ban is enacted, it doesn't magically destroy all of the banned thing. What it does do is restrict access of that thing to the most powerful, most wealthy, and most well-connected people. Luckily, this so-called assault weapons ban was temporary. The bill stipulated it would last only 10 years. Although, since it expired in 2004, there have been multiple failed attempts to renew the ban. Fact 8. American police are increasingly militarized. Okay, so this isn't really a fact about the Second Amendment, but it does make the Second Amendment just as important now, if not more so, as when it was written. As someone who used to be pro-gun control, this is an argument I trotted out all the time. Sure, in the days when there were roving British soldiers during the Revolutionary War and all, citizens might have needed guns, but those days are long gone. What I didn't understand was that today's police officers are, in many ways, the equivalent of yesteryear's British soldiers. Like the British soldiers, they roam the streets with an undeserved air of authority, enforcing laws many of us find reprehensible, their uniforms and weapons funded by the involuntary collection of taxes. And as we saw during, for example, the riots in Ferguson, Missouri, those weapons are absurdly powerful. We're talking stuff that was used by the military during the invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan. The ability of each and every citizen, not just the rich, not just those with friends in Congress, not just those already well off enough to own a gun, to acquire and own a gun, is a check on those police, who, as we've seen time and time again, have the tendency to abuse their authority. So there are 8 facts about the Second Amendment, a contentious and poorly written amendment with a checkered history, but a crucially important one nonetheless. Which did you find the most interesting? Answer in the comments, and while you're at it, consider one further question. What comes first, rights or government? I mean, is it the government's responsibility to provide a Bill of Rights in the first place? Must it be the government that provides the right of the people to keep and bear arms? Because if the government giveth, does that mean the government can taketh away?